I can't tell if this, I guess it's going. Hello there, Internet. We're going a little off the cuff today on account of, this one's been dinking around in the old bean for a while and hasn't quite made its way out, and I don't feel like structuring it's going to make it happen any faster. So we're doing this live, you know? So what I want to talk about is another way, just another thing to be on the lookout for if you're dealing with somebody who professes to be interested in helping you to find your well-being, and you suspect maybe a charlatan, and you should always suspect everybody who professes to help you find your well-being is a charlatan. And if they're not, they'll come through. But this is the elevated floor effect, and this is not just sort of self-help charlatans use this. This is actually used a ton all over politics, religion, what have you. Once you grok it, you'll see it everywhere. But it takes advantage of the fact that there's a cognitive bias for human beings, that we're incredibly sensitive to hierarchies. We're social animals. We tend to live in hierarchical systems, and we have like special purpose hardware that's like dedicated to just where do I live in this hierarchy. And we are especially sensitive to being on the bottom of hierarchies. So it's disproportionately painful to find oneself on the bottom of a perceived hierarchy. So people exploit that by erecting for someone some vision of some hierarchy where they cannot fall to the bottom rung of the ladder, right? So it's like, okay, we have this whole structure, and some people are on the top, and some people are rungs down, and some people are on the bottom. And these are just the worst of the worst here. And it's tremendously comforting to people if they can believe in a system where they're guaranteed to never be in that bottom group. And so, you see it in politics all over the place, in political like mass movements, especially extremist movements, where people are encouraged to sort of base their self-esteem in whatever characteristic it is that they're told keeps them out of the bottom group. And it's really fascinating right now. So, my politics are not particularly extreme. But when I look at the left and the right, on both extremes, you see this effect going on. And they're actually kind of, at the moment, mirror images of each other, which is a little fascinating. So, like, if you're in America on the extreme right wing, as long as you are a white male, you can't be at the lowest rung of the social ladder, right? It's good to be white, but especially if you're a white man, like, you're intrinsically better than everyone else, and no matter how miserable a failure your life is, you'll never be as awful as all those browns and sexual minorities and other things. And on the extreme left, subset of the extreme left, I think it's a little less prevalent, there's the inverse, where it's as long as you're not a white male, it doesn't matter how much of a jerk you are at all times, because as long as you're not a white male, as long as, cis-het white male, as long as you have some sort of minority status that elevates you up a rung, because they have this sort of inverted ladder where it's like the people who are most privileged are the worst people. And both those are really interesting because it keeps you within your group, right? If you found your vision of the value of your person in the fact that you were excluded from the bottom rung of these ladders, then you are tied to the vision of the group that set up this hierarchy. And it serves as a really powerful disincentive to leave groups, because it's, if I leave this group, then I have to reevaluate my understanding of the world vis-a-vis that group's ideology, and that group's ideology is actually the thing keeping me safe from the prospect of perceiving myself at the bottom of some hierarchical structure, and that's not appealing, so I'm just going to double down and stick with these people. And that's really dangerous, and that's how people get exploited political movements, but it's also how people get exploited in sort of self-help and bleeds into religious movements, where it's you get into this area where it's you're part of the elect, you're part of the people who are let in on some secret, you're part of, you know, the initiated, and that means that no matter how badly you may be doing within our little group, you're not as bad as the unwashed masses outside of our group. But of course, should you leave our little group, then you will be worse than the unwashed masses. You'll be the apostate, which is the most hated. We may disdain the people outside of our group, or if we're a little friendlier, we may pity the people outside of our group, but we hate the people who leave our group, who enter and then exit. And so that erects this sort of wall binding you to this group. And so even if you get into it and it's very nice and helpful and they're actually doing things that support your well-being, and then it takes a turn and it becomes exploitive and a lot's being demanded of you and your well-being is not really being served, there's this tremendous disincentive to leave the group, because then you have to reckon with the fact that you have to exit this constructed hierarchy of the group where you were safe because you could never be the lowest of the low. Now, within that hierarchy, you are the worst possible, but then you have to re-enter the sort of natural hierarchies of the world, where there's wealth and status and power hierarchies, where you may find yourself right at the bottom. You don't have any guarantee. There's no elevated floor. You could fall all the way down into the dirt. So that's just, again, one thing to be on the lookout for. And like I said, you'll see it everywhere once you start thinking in those terms, that creating a hierarchy, a vision of either how things are or how things ought to be, where someone, due to some intrinsic character attribute, or due to, you know, having some piece of knowledge or being a part of a certain group, cannot possibly fall to the lowest rung, that provides a tremendous incentive for people to really stick with your group, pay attention to your group, even when things have taken a turn that might not be serving their best interests anymore. So if you see that happening, if you find yourself in a situation where you've fallen in with some crowd and you really find them saying, you know, well, at least you can never be as bad as such and such, red flags. Wait a minute. So maybe this is just a happenstance coming together of they don't know any better, but they're well-intentioned. But it may be that they are setting up a sort of a fire break against you leaving in the face of the exploitation that they have planned for you in the future. So keep on the lookout. If you find that your floor has been elevated, if you find that people are trying to erect a vision where you cannot fall to the bottom rung of some social hierarchy, understand that that might be a tool that's used against you in the future. And I think, yeah, I've got at least one more of these videos, maybe two coming along. If I had taken some notes and planned this out, I could tell you what they were. But I can't. So, there we are. I hope everybody's out there still living that wholesome 2018 life, still keeping the vision of their well-being at the center of their attention, and generally having success practicing being a happy human being.